for this speech. And the recording is beginning. You may now begin.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. This is Creating and Selling Original Work, and I'm Kody Chamberlain. And I'm going to do a quick little intro here. Some of you I've already met and known, but a couple new faces. I got my start here at UL. I majored in advertising design or the Dutch Kepler, and lots of logo work through the years, and I still do a fair amount of logo work. Some recent stuff there and some older work. I still do a fair amount of graphic design. It's maybe 20–25% of my workday. But I look for, these days, I look for really interesting projects. So this is a board game called Maniacal, created by Hassan Lopez. He kind of created all the ideas and built everything with clip art. And my office mate and I collaborated, and we built the whole game from his clip art files. So my office mate, Rob Guillory, did the art illustrations, and I did the entire board design, pieces, dice, everything like that. Here's a little bit of a close-up of some of those. Lots of commercial illustration as I was getting out of college. So this was for a skateboard line. And throughout the years, I've continued to kind of dabble in commercial illustration work. That sort of led me to doing concept art and storyboarding for film and television. So I got to work on the concept art for WATCHMEN. This is the feature film from WarnerBros, not the HBO series. So this is a couple years before the series. And concept art is essentially, we get the screenplay of the script, and it's got visual elements indicated by text. So our job as concept artists is to create the first visuals of what those worlds might look like. And then from there, the animators use it to do the panel-to-panel animation. And Bad Country is a film I storyboarded. Actually, this one's shot in Baton Rouge, starring Matt Dillon and Willem Dafoe. Really cool crime film about this guy that goes undercover, and crazy story. And a bit of off-the-wall kind of stuff for Funny or Die with Rob Kuttner, who's a comedy writer, kind of mostly known for being one of the lead writers on the Conan O'Brien late night show. And a good bit of stuff for MTV through the years. Some of their promotional materials. We've done some comics. MTV had a line of comics for a while, and we did one of my books, Punks the Comic, was through that. And lots of video game adaptations in the world of comics. So this is one I did for Halo. I wrote and drew a story about Fireteam Majestic's Poker Night. And oddly enough, I don't really play video games, but they keep bringing me back to do video game adaptations and comics, which is fun. So I've done Resistance, Fall of Man, Hawken, and a couple other ones. They're a blast to do. And 91st Academy Awards. This was a couple years ago. Stan Lee had just passed away. Spider-Verse was up for Best Picture, Best Animation, sorry. And Black Panther was up for Best Picture. So NBC wanted to do sort of a comic book theme to their presentation. So I did a full 5-minute presentation, and comic fans will recognize the Jack Kirby sort of influence on the Academy Award there. At this point, I've worked for a lot of great companies. There's a couple of new ones I'm excited to be able to add, but I have to wait for that stuff to kind of come out and get announced. But my world mostly centers around what I call story art. So I do the writing and the story together. And so that's a skill set that kind of allows me to move between film, television, comics, children's books, things like that. 3 of the projects I've either created or been heavily involved in have been optioned for feature film development. And so what that means is the studio or the network pays for the right to make it. It doesn't mean they will, but they pay for the rights to do it. Tag is a horror comic that I did with a writer named Keith Giffen. And The Foundation is one of my original creations at Boom Studios. We got that set up at Fox. And of course, I already mentioned Punks had gone to MTV. And a couple new ones in the works. We'll see how far we can get with them. But my big project, the bestseller, is Sweets, a New Orleans crime story. It's a murder mystery, not unlike something you might see on HBO, Showtime, Epic, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to get into how I create stuff. And the most important thing I want you to try to lock onto is the universal concept. So do a little bit of reverse engineering here with the stuff I'm talking about. So latch onto the ideas and the concepts and try to apply it to what you do, because some of this stuff is going to be fairly specific to what I do. But having moved from advertising to comics to animation to live action and film and television, I can tell you that the skills work in all these areas. So pick up on the basics and try to apply those to what you do. So really, it's about the patterns. So here's what I mean. If you like a color palette, Sure, you can sample the exact colors and use it, but that won't necessarily help you become a better creator. Rather, the better technique would be to understand how the colors work and why they work, and then be able to apply it to your own stuff. But a simple example of that is the concept of value versus color. So value meaning light and dark, whereas color is just the different pigments, the different hues, right? When it comes to readability, which is super important, value is more important than color. So that's one of the lessons I learned. Actually, I didn't learn this in college. I learned this working with a few different art directors when I got into advertising. So the way you think about value is, if you take a grayscale photo of something, are they the same tone of gray? That's the way to kind of think about it, right? So if we extract all the color and just go to grayscale, you can even use your phone sometimes to test it, flip it to the grayscale mode and see what the colors look like. This is really how camouflage works, right? The colors are very similar, the patterns are similar, and it blends in, doesn't quite work. Whereas readability is really about contrast. It's about light and dark, always about light and dark. There's a grayscale of that same image. And really, it's so powerful, you can use it with the same color. So this is all just blue, right? But you can see how readability works when it comes to color theory. So if you dissect it and you pick up on the idea of, oh, now I understand how color works, versus sampling a specific color palette, you can now use it in everything you do versus one project. So it becomes sort of a tool in your tool set. All right, so let's get into creating and selling original work. This is kind of the bulk of the stuff I do, and this is what I really love about what I do. So there's 2 steps on how to do just about anything. Step 1 is make something great. Step 2 is show it to the right people. Now, if you're not getting traction, you're either doing the steps in the wrong order or you're skipping one. Maybe the thing that you're doing is not so great. Maybe you're showing it to the wrong people. Some people show work before it's ready, right? That's a big problem too. So it's kind of a shortcut that's not going to quite get you there. So those are really the 2 steps on how I've been able to do the stuff that I do. And I'm going to drill in a little bit deeper into both of these. So the question I get asked a lot, like we just had Comic-Con this past weekend, I think I was asked 7 times where you get your ideas, right? That's sort of the thing everyone wants to know about. I do have inspiration. I like getting inspired, but I refer to inspiration as an ice cream truck. It's really fun when it shows up, but you can't depend on it for creative work. It's never going to be there when you need it, right? Totally unreliable. Chuck Close put it more bluntly. He said, inspiration is for amateurs. I kind of like that. So let's talk about the process. Where do you start? So I almost never start with an idea. I start with the pieces that I have in place. And so these aren't yet ideas. These are just what I call interesting things. So they're not finished pieces. They're not story concepts, or sometimes not even characters. It could just be a very simple twist. It could be a story turn if I'm writing something. If it's a poster design, it might be a color palette that I'm kind of thinking about, right? Or a combination, something like that. But it is always different. Every single project I've ever done has been different. And so really, I try to spend my days focusing on observing interesting things. I make the notes on my phone. I'm taking photos of, like there's a plug here that says do not use, and I'm currently using it. So I took a photo of that just a minute ago because I thought it was interesting. But little things like I was in a conversation, and I've used this example before, but I was in a conversation with someone that I had never met. Someone introduced us, we were at dinner, and the person at the table, no matter what we talked about, kept bringing the conversation back to the one thing they were an expert at, because that's kind of where they felt comfortable, like the subject that they know really well. And I thought that was a really interesting character trait I could probably use in a script someday. So this is sort of how it works. Like, that's a cool kind of character. They weren't narcissistic, they weren't rude. I could just tell they were uncomfortable talking about anything else except the thing they knew, right? And they kept kind of steering it back. So that's kind of interesting. So that's an example of the types of notes I would make on stuff like this. But also, it's great for life too. This is sort of honing in on the whole stop and smell the roses concept, right? Kind of just taking a minute to kind of observe the world around you and enjoy it a little bit. So for me, it's the process that creates the idea. And that means you have to start before you're ready. So I almost never start any project with like what I consider a great idea. I've heard people say things like, you need to know everything about your project before you begin. You probably heard similar things to that. And I consider that to be absolute nonsense. So close your eyes for a second. Try to visualize the idea of writing something before you write it, right? It's impossible because that's just called writing. And so it really doesn't work. You really have to kind of dive in first. So I always trust the process. And I know that much of my early sketch work will be terrible, and I just do it anyway. But this is a really important point to stop on here because since sketch work is usually terrible, this is a major point of failure for new creators. They see a work that they love and it's brilliant and it's amazing and they want to create work like that, and they try and it's terrible and people stop, right? It's a really big point of failure because I do art classes in my studio, and I see it happen all the time. You know, a student has an idea, a vision for something, they try to execute it, they can't, and they give up. So it's probably the single greatest point of failure for creative work. But you have to do it anyway, and you have to understand that you're going to suck. So give yourself permission to suck because you will suck. And you must suck. It's a really important part of the process. So my dad's retired Marine Corps, and he has a way of saying embrace the suck because that's where you're learning the most. But it's also kind of cool because every time you fail, every time an idea you're trying doesn't work, you'll understand why and you'll start to know more about your project. In a way, the work kind of has a way of teaching you about the work. I have another term for this. I call it shoveling dirt. And if you want the treasure, you have to shovel some dirt. Okay, problems. Problems are interesting. We usually try to avoid problems, right? They get in the way of the things we're trying to do. However, creative problems are essential to the process. These are like rocket fuel for creative work. In fact, I go out of my way to try to manufacture problems as I'm doing creative work. So common problems have already been solved. We talked about the contrast thing just a minute ago. We can just learn that and use it now in whatever we want to do. We can also use the opposite. If we want to camouflage something in our work, we can use color in the same way, right? We can create something that's kind of hidden and kind of fade it to the background, and maybe the reader of our comic or our film won't notice it, right? And it'll become a big clue later. So we can use all that. We can subvert it in creative ways. But once we know it, a common solution to a problem can be something we use forever. Unique problems, that's where it gets really interesting. So unique problems give birth to unique solutions, and this is your opportunity for originality. This is the good stuff. This is also the universe of which you hear everyone talk about branding and world building. This is kind of what that is. If there are any Star Trek fans in here, you probably know about the transporter, aka a teleporter. So they were trying to make a sci-fi show on a cowboy show budget back in the 60s, right? They had no money to do any of these effects. It was incredibly expensive. They were up against shows that really would, the major budget expense was to rent horses for the episode, right? So they were trying to build these spaceships, and they tried over and over to create these little shuttles that would land on alien planets, and it just looked terrible. It looked kind of embarrassing, and they refused to run it. So their solution was to create the transporter where they can beam from their ship to the remote location, and now they're on the desert planet, right? And so that was a budgetary constraint that they had that other TV shows didn't, and their creative solution really became a super important part of the Star Trek universe. Like, it's so ingrained in DNA, it's hard to imagine Star Trek without the transporter, right? So this is what I mean by creative solution to a very unique problem. It really becomes part of what the idea is all about. And I mentioned earlier how most of my ideas happen during the creative process. That's where all the problems are. So that's why that works, right? So the problem comes first, then the solution. But the problem is also the answer in most cases. If you can identify those problems in the creative work, that's where your answer, that's where your creative work is really going to highlight. Okay, so let's talk about framing. Anybody know what that is? Come on, you could say it. It's urinals, right? They're pretty gross. You guys know what that is? Oh God, you guys don't know what this is? A bunch of artists. This is not a urinal. This is called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. It's a found art sculpture that showed in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And in the 60s, it sold for $1.76 million. It is also a urinal. That's what framing is. So framing the work is often, it's more important than the work itself, sometimes more important. It's really essential to the work that we're doing. So if you're not thinking about framing while you're doing creative work, you're really missing out because this is powerful stuff. So how you approach the industry, how you approach professionals in particular, and the specific presentation you're doing for that work is key. So here's a little secret. The people we're looking for in these creative worlds are also looking for us. The difference is we're in the bathroom and they're in the gallery. Now, why are they in the gallery? Because they think we're artists, right? Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that the craziest thing you've ever heard? But presentation, super important. And the first thing you need to know about presentation is that it's primal. And so the lizard brain makes decisions before we ever even have a chance to consider a situation where we might make a decision. So the brain's already decided in a lot of cases. And it's really the first hurdle we have to overcome. So there's an example of that. So let's talk about like the language we use to describe what we're doing. That's kind of a good way to get into this. So let's say I did this presentation at a film festival, and you walk around on the floor and you're talking to creators and stuff, and this is the way people talk about their scripts. A writer has a new 61-page script as a pilot for a television series, a full 2 years of work. They're super thrilled about it, right? They're trying to get a big name actor, but obviously they have to find an agent or a manager first to help them create it, right? That's sort of the way people talk about their art on the floor of Comic-Con. That's the way artists talk about their work in galleries. Not specifically that, not exactly that, but that's the type of talk people do. That's not sculpture, that's a urinal, right? If we want to talk about art and sell art, we have to speak about art in artistic terms. And we don't want to talk about the wrenches and the plumbing and the pipes and stuff like that. So here's an example. This is a show I happen to like on Apple TV. It's called Slow Horses. It's a tense spy thriller about a group of MI5 misfits starring Gary Oldman. Like, that's a show I want to watch. That's art, right? It really doesn't tell me much more than the other one did, but we're now talking about it in industry terms. We're talking about it with artistic terms, and it's short, it's sweet, it's memorable. So just a real easy way to kind of think about, let's talk less about the pipes and talk more about the art and the presentation of it. Now, your daily work will be the process. That's where we're fully immersed all day. The 61-page script, like that's where we're living, right? The tools and everything. But you have to talk about the art because that's what people care about. That's what other industry professionals care about. That's what your audience is going to care about. Okay, so the approach. What I mean by the approach is not like how you decide to make what you make. I mean like specifically how you show your work to other professionals. It's immensely important. Again, I showed the sandwich example just a bit ago. This stuff is super primal. The first impression is everything. It can really make or break your chances of getting anywhere with this stuff. So here's the most common approach I see and get. Someone will say, hey, nice to meet you. Will you read my script? I get that all the time. I got it multiple times at Comic-Con. People are showing books and stuff like that. It's not really going to work. So, if you feel yourself about to ask a stranger for a favor, try to stop and think of a more creative way to do this stuff, because that's not going to work for you. There's actually a term for it called over the transom. You guys know what a transom is? I was hoping I would have one in here, but it's a little window over doors sometimes in offices. And what used to happen, especially in Hollywood and animation and stuff like that, writers would take their scripts and just throw it in someone's office hoping they'd read it someday, right? It's a kind of a terrible way to ever get your work recognized. It could work, it's possible, but probably not. More than likely, you're gonna waste a script and it's gonna go nowhere. You might even make people a little bit angry, actually. So here's why it doesn't work. There are simply too many people trying to do the same thing we're trying to do. The volume is incredible. I know a few film agents and managers. I know a few art dealers. I know a few people that run major galleries, right? The volume of submissions they get is unbelievable. You would never even consider, like, I look at my email box and I'm overwhelmed every day. I can't even imagine being the head of a studio or something like that. It'd be total madness. So the volume is unbearable. Creative industries are also concerned about crazy people. And sounds like a joke, but it's actually really true. Like, it's hard to do work with someone that's kind of nutty or loony, and they're paranoid about it. They're terrified about it because it happens all the time. And once you start a major collaboration with someone, you think about, especially if we're doing a film or a comic, it could be anywhere from several months to multiple years, right? And so it's not as if there's a single transaction and we move on. These are long-term relationships for creative work, so we have to really think about that. It's a big deal. And here's the big one, so everybody get ready for it, the skill factor. It's a major, major deal that we don't often consider. And with rare exception, no one will pay you to do something you haven't already done. And that's the truth, right? That's the big hurdle. Don't worry, I'm going to solve this for you in a second. But that's really the big one we're trying to overcome. So let me clarify that a little bit. So if I need to hire someone to mow my lawn, no big deal. I can call a friend from college who is helpful. Someone will come and cut that grass, and it's probably going to look pretty good. If I need someone to build a house, I'm only going to hire someone that's built a house before, and so would you, right? Is there any exceptions to that? Like, would any of you hire someone to build your house that's never built a house before? Probably not. So this is the hurdle you have to overcome. And if you think about it in those terms, it actually becomes a little bit easier to get over it, and I'll show you how. So this is specialty work, the stuff we're doing, especially in the entertainment world. It's super expensive now to do anything, even a comic, animation, live action movies, things like that. Super expensive work to do. It requires a level of competence most people don't have, and I don't only just mean skill. There's another level of competence of things like hitting deadlines, being professional, right? All these skills that hover around the creative work that we don't often even think about. In the world of intellectual property, experience matters a lot. It's really the key signifier for success. The most likely way to get a hit comic book is to hire a creative team that already has a hit comic book. Like statistically, that's just how it works, right? A newcomer, the odds of failure are super high. So it's a catch-22. No one wants to hire you if you haven't already done it. So how do you get past that wall? So let's go back to my low keys here. How to do just about anything. First step is what? Make something, right? That's the big one. You want to prove you can do something? Do it. So what that means is if you want to be a comic book creator, you can't show pencil samples. You have to go and make a comic. If you want to prove that you're a filmmaker, you have to go and make a film. Even if it's a short film, totally fine. But if you can't cross the finish line, no one's going to take you seriously. You have to be a finisher. Think about someone who's going to tell you all day they can run a marathon, right? Until they've actually run a marathon, there's no way to really know. And it's super important. It's not just semantics. And one of the big reasons is there are countless things you think you know before you do it that you probably don't. And I know you made short films recently, right? You're going to get beat up. And so you got to get beat up a few times. You have to run the gauntlet. You have to know what that's really about. Once you do it, people take you seriously. The thing, I mentioned this earlier, the thing that you're doing helps teach you how to make the thing, right? The process is where you learn it. There's a great Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So professionals need to know that you can get punched in the mouth and stay in the ring, right? It's a huge deal. You need to prove you can go 12 rounds, then you get noticed. But it also makes you a finisher. You're no longer an aspiring creator. You're now a creator, right? You've crossed the threshold. All right, so that's the first way. You want to prove you can do something, go and do it. The next way is borrowing experience. This one's trickier, takes longer, but it's possible. But unless you've actually done something, at least, this is not going to work for you. But if you're trying to move from a $10,000 short film to a $200 million major motion picture, that's a significant jump, right? And this is where borrowing experience can really help. But again, the odds of a first timer directing something like that, impossible. You have to have some sort of work in existence that everyone can experience. So let's say you're Donnie Brasco and you'd like to join the mafia. You guys have seen Donnie Brasco? You don't even need to watch my presentation. Everything about this is in that movie. It's pretty awesome. So let's say you want to join the mafia, but you've never been in the mafia. You have a few options. So option one, you can write a query letter to the mafia. You can enter some mafia contests. Send your samples to the mafia blindly, throw them over the door if you'd like. You can tag mafia people on Twitter, or you can make a friend in the mafia. Number 5 is the only one that would ever work, right? And it's the only one that ever has worked. Making friends is more fun anyway. So let's see if I can get this to play. Well, maybe not. All right, there's a clip from Donnie Brasco where he's meeting with the Al Pacino character. And he says, when I introduce you, I'm going to say you're a friend of mine. That means you're connected. Once you get in the door, then you become a friend of ours. That means you're a made guy, right? Donnie Brasco holds all the secrets to this stuff. Where to find potential friends. So conventions, trade shows, festivals, Facebook groups are awesome. Industry-specific workshops like this, right here, right now. Evening classes, Discord servers, there's a bunch of those popping up lately for specific industries. But the goal with all this is to build a circle of trust. And so it's not good enough to simply be in the right circles. There has to be a level of trust in those circles. And so think about it in terms of, for those of you that are a little bit older, think about it in terms of getting a co-signer for a loan, right? The only person that would ever sign for you for a loan is someone that knows you're going to repay it. Otherwise, they have to, right? So you have to build that circle of trust. This is how big of a deal it is. So if you're a writer, you got to start a writers group. If you're a photographer, you got to start those groups, right? That's why we used to have the Advertising Federation here. It was so important to have the Ad Fed. I know they've disbanded or we're trying to get it back, but those types of groups are super important, right? To be involved in as much of that stuff as you can. So how do you earn trust? How do you earn the trust of a group? First thing, some of these I discovered by accident. No one ever taught me this stuff. Just kind of being in the groups and watching what worked and what didn't, and I make notes all the time. Offer help instead of asking for it. That's the big one. There's a comic book creator named Bill Sienkiewicz. Some of you probably know. He started the Jimi Hendrix of comic books. He kind of came into the industry and totally re-envisioned how comic books could work, what the art could look like. Kind of a genius. I was set up next to him at a Comic-Con, and his table was super busy. I had just gotten started, and I had no one at my table for hours, and I was so incredibly bored. His line was in front of my table, so I would try to sell stuff to his line. And at a certain point, I was going bored out of my mind. I'm like, I'm going to get some coffee. I'm going to make a run. I offered to buy him one just because he was busy and he hadn't left his table in hours. So I brought him a coffee. Later on, I did it again because I was still dead all day. And the very next comic book convention, when I got to my table, I was sitting next to Bill Sienkiewicz again. And I was like, man, it's kind of cool that, they put us next to each other again. And he said, oh yeah, I requested you. Because I was the guy that was buying him coffee, right? And so I was like, well, I'm not buying your coffee anymore. You're gonna buy your own coffee. But so I was bored. I offered to help him, and it was kind of a lesson to where I probably could have asked him for a favor before I knew the guy, but that's not what I was trying to do. I was legitimately trying to help him because he was super busy all day. So that's number one, offer help instead of asking for it. So be the solution, not the problem. That's similar, but a little bit different. Be kind, honest, and a good friend. So, lots of versions of that, but the big one for this creative work is Smiley's my good friend, and I know if I show him something, it's going to be secret. He's not going to share it. He's not going to talk about it. He knows that he's in my circle of trust, and we can depend on each other, and no one's ever going to see it unless I want them to see it, right? It's hugely important. Be a connector, introduce compatible creators, and so what that means is, I work in comics. Sometimes I meet a great writer. Sometimes I meet a great artist. I'm going to pair them up every single time, and it's led to some great collaborations through the years, even a couple marriages. Be a champion of your work, be proud of it, but don't push it on people. That's the worst thing you could possibly do, is to push your work at people because it turns them off. Let them discover it. They'll kind of take ownership of it. They'll think it was their idea. That's kind of where you want to be. Make friends with people who are on the same journey. You're going to form those tight circles. So obviously we want to network with people in other industries. If you're a writer, you want to meet directors and producers, right? But you also need to meet and know a lot of other writers. Super important. I'm gonna give you a couple examples of this, but it happens over and over and over through time. The Seattle scene, the grunge scene, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, all those bands, they're all very close friends before any of those bands broke through, right? Did you guys know that? They were playing each other's shows and opening for each other, and they were helping on each other's albums and stuff like that. When one band got a manager, the manager networked through and got the other bands. When one got a major show, the other band went and opened for them, and they all kind of helped each other out, right? It happens over and over and over. The Pixar Brain Trust started the exact same way with all these animators at Pixar. It happened in film. Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, Brian De Palma. They're all really close friends before anyone had a movie out, right? And we all know those names from the world of film. The Rat Pack, same thing happened. Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, right? Same thing. It happens over and over and over throughout time. It also happened with the French impressionistic movement with Manet and Monet and all those guys. They did the same thing way back when. So it's super critical. It's probably, in my opinion, the single best reason to go to college. Depending on the college, it might be the only reason to go to college. Yes. Oh, okay. Let's see. Sorry about that. All right, let's see if we can get this going again. Oh. Did the connection slip or something? All right, I'm gonna toggle this real quick. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. I'm a roll, so I didn't want to stop you.
Oh, still white, huh? Okay, let me do this. Close that.
Is there a link you can have, decisions or email?
Yeah, I have some cards over there. If you email me, I'll send it to you.
Video in there too, so I'm just trying to do a poster or something like that.
This conversation is being recorded right now.
Yeah, I wonder if it's that driver I downloaded for this thing. It's usually pretty stable. All right,
It's showing up until the point where you're trying to show the video.
we'll get it back up. I think just restarting the system might be the trick, so. There we go, all right. Get through some of this nonsense.
That's kind of cool.
Does it look cool? All
That's
right.
cool.
Yeah, Star Trek urinals, blah, 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 sandwiches.
It went out right after the mafia, right after the birds.
Donnie Brasco, yeah.
Right.
All right, so there's our how do you earn trust? There we go. It's about where we were. So make friends with people who are on the same journey, super important. Again, like sometimes the only reason to go to college. But you have to build genuine relationships. These can't be transactional contacts. You can't just call someone when you need something, right? That's not what this is. The rising tide raises all ships, you know, the Sinatra thing and all that, we talked about it. You know, but it's also true that you hear the story about the assistant who 2 years from now is going to be running a major studio, that kind of thing. It literally just happened to me. A friend of mine, David McInerney, was a literary manager. So he was kind of in the process of filmmaking, but he wasn't a filmmaker. He was helping introduce creators to other people. He just got hired to be a lead developer for a studio. Kind of awesome. So it happens all the time, and when it's your contact, you're golden. If you do it properly, you'll create what I call the circle of trust. And it's incredibly important to have a couple of these. I have a few in different areas. And once you're in that circle, and not before, once you're in that circle, you can ask for a referral to someone in a key position. Never expect or demand one. And the main reason is that professional relationships can be really tricky, right? You know, maybe there's bad blood, maybe there's an unfinished project, maybe something didn't go so well last time, maybe we know so-and-so is getting a divorce, like there's a million problems. As creators, if someone turns down a referral, our natural instinct is to think, oh, they think I'm not good enough. That's kind of where our brain goes, but that's almost never the case. Plus, if you're in my circle of trust and your work's not good enough, I will tell you. I'm not going to deceive you and tell you that it is, and then not give you a referral. So that's why the trust element is so important. Have I done that for you? All right. Again, the co-signer for a loan thing is the best analogy I can come up with this. It has to be based on trust and respect. So that trust must extend from within your circle out to those being contacted, right? So if you got someone that's a little shady in your circle of trust, that's not so good. It has to be someone that has you know, some maintenance over their professionalism. And again, these relationships can be super delicate, so we never really demand a referral. It's really optional in all cases. In fact, when I ask for a referral, I always open with, feel free to say no if this is weird or it's unprofessional. I'm trying to reach so-and-so. Is there a chance of an introduction, right? If they say no, no problem. Move on to the next one. Not all referrals are equal. Obviously, it's a sliding scale, but as you move up through the industry and your peers move up through the industry, your referral system is going to get stronger and stronger. Think of it like you're in the center of a spoke of bicycles that kind of, you know, the spokes reach out to the wheel and they get a little bit further out as you go. If a trusted, experienced professional decides to vouch for you, the odds will now tilt in your favor. So the whole thing of someone never hiring you to do something you haven't done before. I've worked with a lot of different publishers. I've worked with Marvel and DC and Image. And if I refer someone to IDW that I think could hit a deadline, that carries some weight for IDW because I've done multiple books with them, right? So why do referrals work so well when cold calling doesn't work? So it's like you're actually adding a person in between you and the one you're trying to contact. It seems like, you know, the whole concept of eliminate the middleman is kind of the opposite. You want to add the middleman in this process. So why do referrals work so well? Real recognize real. So no matter what it is you do, I guarantee you, when you see someone else doing it well, you recognize it really quickly. Whereas someone who doesn't do it for a living takes them a while. Like, I'm an artist, I can walk through this gallery and pick up the 5 artists that are going to make it. I would never tell them, I'd never say it out loud, but I can guarantee you I can do it, right? That's just kind of how this stuff works. If you're a musician, if you're a bass player, you instantly know whether or not someone can play a bass when you hear the first couple notes, right? So that's why it's so powerful in the industry. It's trusted. And also my reputation's on the line when I do it, and the industry professionals know that. So the referral system kind of works like a sifter. It doesn't find the diamonds, but it eliminates the stones from the mud. It's kind of a elimination process. So this is the very definition of borrowed experience. This is how this works. So why can't great work stand on its own? That's kind of the question that always comes up. And it happens every day. It's just very inefficient for it to happen. Remember the total number of examples we talked about. So the solution I'm offering is the difference between investing and buying a lottery ticket, right? You can win the lottery. Someone always wins the lottery, right? The odds of it being you are pretty low. So it's a little philosophical thing that may make its way into a book at some point, but I'm gonna share a couple random things with you real quick. So this is one called entry points that I've been thinking about a lot, and I use it in my own work. So let's say this little blue dot is all the stuff we're fully aware of. Let's keep it to entertainment right now, specific to entertainment. So film, TV shows, animation, video games, comics, music, all the stuff we kind of know and love in the world of animation. But you have a new thing. You have some new idea, some new thing you want to drop. You can sure drop it in the middle of this. It's tricky, right? Sometimes there's a market for it. If you're doing a Lifetime Christmas movie, people love Lifetime Christmas movies. The odds of you getting a viewership is probably there. It may not be a huge smash hit, may not be a big success, but people are probably going to watch it and like it, right? There's also the derivative version of this where let's take Die Hard and put it in a shopping mall or a submarine or an airplane, right? Whatever. To start rehashing. Let's take Romeo and Juliet, but put it in the Bronx, right? This is all the stuff that kind of lives in there. Not a new idea. There's no new original vision to it. It's something we've seen before. But not your thing. Your thing is new. They haven't seen it before. It's way out there in left field, right? Or right field. The terms people use for this type of work is ahead of its time, right? That's the term we get. No one gets it. It's confusing. Think about It's a Wonderful Life. One of my favorite movies of all time. It bombed in the theater. Everyone hated it. Frank Capra was kind of a genius. He was a visual genius, the director of the film. He did some stuff in that movie audiences of that time had never seen before. It was jarring, way ahead of its time. No one liked it. The movie bombed. It bombed so hard, the studio didn't even bother to renew the copyright, and it fell into the public domain, right? For them, it was garbage. Now the movie is a classic. Everyone loves it, yet it's in the public domain, so no one makes any money on it. It's really bizarre, but that's kind of how it works. So it was too far ahead of its time. People didn't connect with it. And there's countless examples of this kind of thing. So if we can take our thing that's out of left field and move a little bit closer and create a contact point with the stuff we do know, we create a little entry point there, right? And you can sort of move from one to the other. Here's an example. So I'm an older guy. I'm in my 50s now. And I was there when email first came out. But before email came out, we were using all sorts of stuff. We were using ICQ, and there was all these different apps we were on and stuff. There were bulletin boards. None of it made any sense except to someone who was really, really interested or a programmer. The app that changed the world and got everyone into using the internet was email. And what email did was it used a common format. So you open your email system, and there was the return address on the top left. The person you're sending it to is in the center, and where the stamp would be was the send button, right? And it was called email. So we understood what that was. It was an entry point into a new technology. And so that little idea of attaching it to something we know and we're familiar with is a great way to launch a new project and to kind of increase the likelihood of your project being successful. High concept also works. There's a comic book writer I know. His name is Van Jensen. He came up with what's probably the single greatest comic book idea of all time, and it's called Pinocchio Vampire Slayer. So Pinocchio meets a vampire, tells a couple lies, breaks off his nose, and stabs him in the heart. It's genius. It's the best idea ever. So that's another way to do it. People love a great idea. Pixar kind of does their thing. It's amazing. Like they had a continuous run of hits, like their first 12 movies or something were all blockbusters, which is unheard of in Hollywood and animation. Hit after hit after hit after hit. And they really didn't have much high concept at all. Like the Incredibles, we've already seen that a million times with Fantastic Four, right? Like they were sort of in familiar territory. What Pixar was doing was they would have like the little clip in their trailer that was super emotional, right? Like animation was so much about flair. They're like, we're going for heart in our animation. So they dropped that little clip with the heart. Everyone falls in love with the characters from the trailer and they got to go see it. So that's what they kind of did. That was their entry point, was let's give them a lot of heart in the trailer and people are going to love it. And they did. Great hook for a song, something memorable. There's a lot of different versions of this, but to connect it to something in a way to where people can sort of ease into it without being jarred is going to help your odds a lot. So happy accidents. You guys know Bob Ross? I've done a million different presentations. Bob Ross is in almost all of them. So I was watching, you play hooky from school when you're 11 years old or 12 years old, whatever, and you put on the television, there's 3 channels. Bob Ross is on one of them, right? And he would paint what's called wet on wet, and he would do it live on camera, which is terrifying because the paint never dries, and he's doing this in front of the world, right? It's the most terrifying thing in the world. And on one of the episodes, he turned to the camera and his palette scraped the canvas. It was a scene, it wasn't this one, but it was similar. He was doing like a lake or a pond, and it was a scrape right across the water. And instead of trying to fix it or repair it, he just smiled at the camera and he turned it into a fallen tree into the water. It was beautiful. And so the accident inspired, in addition to his composition, he would have never thought of otherwise, and he would have never thought to put it in that spot. So the accident created the idea. It was amazing. But it's a great lesson in, like, he loved it when that problem occurred. Remember how I talked about the problem is the source of the ideas? He was thrilled when that palette scraped the canvas. It was a great lesson. And if you ever watch him, every now and then that'll happen. He'll do something and he'll turn it into something else. So it's a unique problem that inspires a bit of an originality. Okay, so some random tips. Humor is like an idea detector. So anytime you're in a brainstorming session or you're telling a friend about an idea you're working on or something like that, if they make a wisecrack or you make a wisecrack as you end it and it rings true, write it down. Humor is a brilliant idea detector. So it's like, we talked about shoveling the dirt. That's like the beep with the metal detector when you're passing over something. So pay attention to humor when you're brainstorming an idea. Sarcasm, off the cuff jokes, all that stuff. Like, I've actually been in brainstorming meetings and people get mad when someone makes a joke. It's like, you guys have no idea what you're doing. This is the good stuff. Rules, break all the rules. Just be cool about it. Well, what I mean by that is, like, I'm gonna go to comics again. 90% of comic publishers have what they call a closed submission policy. They don't accept work if they don't know you, right? You can send it in, they say they'll throw it away. I've broken that rule 3 different times and got 2 books picked up by breaking it. What I wouldn't do is point it out online or tell a friend about it or anything like that, right? You have to be cool about it if you're gonna break the rules, because if they're aware that you started ratting them out when you're breaking the rule, they're gonna call you on it. It's gonna cause you big trouble. So break all the rules, just be cool about it. We don't ever want to embarrass the people we're trying to do business with. This one's a big deal. Whatever it is you're doing, give it a name. Naming something makes it real and gives it some power and importance. We talked earlier about the Rat Pack, right? That means something, right? Grunge isn't just rock and roll. It's grunge. It's a different type of rock and roll. If you give a dog a name, it's no longer a dog. It's now your dog, right? So that's how giving things a name works. I do it all the time for little, like my idea of, doing all the work that's just terrible until I find a good thing. I call it shoveling dirt. That's the perfect example of what that is. Helps me remember it, helps me explain it to other people, but I do this in all the stuff I do. Kind of universal. Speak their language. So if you want people to understand, you have to speak their language. Let's say you're in college for photography, but you want to work in film. You have to start listening to film podcasts. You have to start understanding the terminology. You have to learn who does what job and why they do it, right? You have to know the language. Filmmaking has an editor. They're the ones that take all the finished clips and cut it together. Comic books have an editor. They're the ones that hire people. It's different, right? And in film, the editor's job would be a producer's job. So film has a producer, comics have an editor. They do the exact same job. So you have to know those things when you're kind of navigating the industries. It helps you understand what's going on. You can communicate your ideas better. When you get into those meetings, it's not as awkward because you understand what's going on. So immerse yourself in the language of whatever you're trying to do and understand it. Simplify to clarify. This is the reason a 2-digit number is easier to remember than a 12-digit or a 10-digit number. And I did this presentation at the Slidell Film Festival, and there were 2 different politicians in the audience. And so I added a little note. Adding signs to a confusing intersection does not make it easier to navigate, right? You add more clutter, you add more information. Like, if you're having readability trouble on your text, don't add an outline, right? That's going to make it even worse. It's going to create visual noise and static around your design. So little things like that. If you want clarity and you're struggling to get clarity, you have to simplify the idea, simplify the visuals, take things out. Don't add anything to it. Imposter syndrome is something you're probably going to deal with at some point. Imposter syndrome is the feeling that everyone's awesome except you, and someday they're going to find out, right? Like someday they're going to find out I can't actually write. And so it took me a while to figure this out because I was drawing comics for 3 or 4 years before I ever really liked anything I was doing. I was like, oh man, it sucks. I wish I could do this better. I really need to figure out how to draw like this guy, right? My whole experience was kind of miserable because I hadn't quite figured this out yet. So the best way to describe imposter syndrome and how to think about it is if you're the magician, you know where the rabbit's hidden. It can never look like magic to you, right? That's the way creative work happens as well. So if you hit the rabbit, it's not going to fool you. The trick won't fool you. So we have to kind of fall in love with the process, the creative process of how to hide the rabbit and how to do all the cool sleight of hand stuff. That's where we live. That's the part we need to enjoy. The magic show is for the audience, not for you. So as long as you understand that, imposter syndrome shouldn't be a problem. But if you hate the process, you're probably going to fail because that's where you spend all your time. So learn to love the process, let the results be for the audience, and you can still enjoy all your favorite creators, right? That never changes. I still love reading great comics from great creators. I can't read my own comics. It just doesn't work. Again, it doesn't look like magic to you if you hit the rabbit. So be messy. That's one of my things is don't be afraid to be messy. Creators rarely show their early work because it's often terrible. Remember we talked about give yourself permission to suck. We all suck. All creators suck. They just don't show it to you. That creates the illusion that they're working without it. And it's not true. Now, Pixar, I use them a good bit. I got some friends over there. They're the exception because everything they do is awesome, even their sketch work. So let's not count Pixar. Let's look at some bad sketches by good creators. All right, so 3 of my favorites, Hitchcock, Spielberg, and Scorsese. Great directors. I love them. I love their vision. Hand-drawn storyboards by Hitchcock. Hand-drawn storyboards by Spielberg. I don't even know what some of that is. Scorsese not even using the right ratio. He's using like a 1920s TV bubble, which is kind of awesome. Here's a close-up. This is from Taxi Driver. But what I want you to think about is none of these creators care about the drawing, the quality of the drawing. That's not why they're doing this. That's why they're doing it. They're solving all the problems before the $1 million film shoot happens. The lights and the cameras and the actors are all there ready to work. You better have your ideas ready to go, right? And so it's pretty jarring how if you look at these Scorsese boards and you watch the film, they're spot on almost every time, right? He did all the thinking before the crew showed up that day to do work. Charlotte's Web was a bad sketch. Charlotte's Web was a book I liked as a kid. Lovecraft. There's some early sketch work for Pac-Man, which is kind of awesome to see. Edison drew a lot for his inventions and ideas, and he actually made a note to make good drawing. So he was fully aware that he was drawing bad, right? He was thinking good. So it's about good thinking. That's a cover I did on the left on an iPhone, on an airplane, and then the final. So maybe you can't out-sketch Peter Paul Rubens. Most of us can't, but you could probably out-sketch Spielberg because he's terrible. Doesn't only extend to drawing. Obviously, this is Christopher Nolan's diagram for Inception. You can tell it made no sense to him either. Trying to figure it out. Francis Ford Coppola, when he was doing The Godfather, cut out every single page of the book and pasted it into these white page areas where he can make all his notes and diagrams and what needs to happen here. And what's cool, he published these a couple years ago. You can go through them and you can see all the doubt, all the questions he had. He didn't quite understand why this was happening the way it was, and to make sure to ask this person about it. Like it was just filled with him, his imposter syndrome. It fills all these books, right? It's amazing. J.K. Rowling's original hand-drawn spreadsheet for Harry Potter. If you look on the top left, you can see October, November, December, started tracking the timeline of the film and then the major characters, arcs, and beats, and pretty amazing. Them lyric sheets, don't look too close at that. Ed Solomon's Bill and Ted, and Ed Solomon still writes longhand. Tarantino still writes longhand. A lot of your favorite screenwriters still write longhand because there's no internet on the tip of your pencil, so you can write all day and not be distracted. Okay, so I have a thing I do. This is just really, I talked about being messy. This is a result of me just being messy. I came up with this technique called rotating notebooks. And so as I wrap up a batch of projects or a major project, I put that book on the shelf and I take another one off. And this notebook's probably been around since college, since the 90s, right? So what ends up happening is instead of starting a notebook, a sketchbook, filling it and putting it on the shelf and forgetting about it, All these things that I've learned and these notes I've taken and these projects I've worked on, it all kind of stays in the zeitgeist. Like it stays in my head because I'm reviewing it every time I go back to a notebook. So I've been using some of the same notebooks for 20 years. I'll just bring it back off the shelf, go to the new page, use it, and I'll flip back through the old stuff and I'll find all sorts of fun little things in there. Jokes I came up with, designs I never used, contact information for a friend I hadn't thought about in a couple of years, right? All those things stay fresh. It's almost like you sort of force yourself to revisit your journal all the time if you're a journal taker, right? Same kind of thing. So I found it by accident just because I have a million sketchbooks everywhere and I would just grab whatever one was handy. But now I kind of do it on purpose. And there's some of them that are kind of still out in rotation, moleskins. So all these books are filled with interesting things. And again, that's kind of where the ideas come from, was the interesting things. And it keeps them active because sometimes an interesting thing doesn't have a home for 20 years and then one day it does, right? And so by keeping them alive and active, keeps them in the head. So one of the major things for me is I'm a quiet person. I sit quiet in my studio, 6 to 8 hours a day. And so, we just did Comic-Con this past weekend and it's incredibly loud. No one can hear you talk. So I was having to yell for 2 days and I lost my voice for a little bit. I finally got it back for this. So if it sounds a little bit weird, that's what's going on. But I lost my voice for a little bit because it was so loud in there. But that's one of the reasons why I do those things. I also don't talk a lot about what I do. Like someone hires me, I make it, I turn it in, right? We almost never talk about it. There's an occasional Zoom call or a meeting or something like that, but someone hires me, I make the thing and I turn it in. That's kind of how it goes. So, as we get older, we sort of know what food we like. We know what we like to do and what we don't like to do. And we sort of ingrain ourselves in those things. So always find ways to make yourself uncomfortable. I think it's super important. And my phrase is sort of become comfortable being uncomfortable. So whatever it is that you're freaked out about or you don't want to do, go out and do it anyway. We were talking earlier about, I used to be in the percussion ensemble at UL. I played drums since 5th grade, I played drums. And I love playing drums and I'm pretty good at it. However, I'm not a dancer. And this guy's brother, Jack's brother, Christian, we did a show and we needed some male dancers because it was a male and female partnership dance thing. And I'd never danced before. I jumped right up and went and did it. Even in college, I kind of had those instincts and it's helped me a lot. But I still have to kind of force myself to do it. So thank you for letting me be uncomfortable in front of you. And if you have any questions, my cards are over there. They did record it, so I'm guessing it's going to be up on the ACA website. Anyway, that's all I got. If you guys got any questions, I'm happy to chat a little bit. To that? The sweet stuff? Oh, the sketch? Just limited color palette. Yeah, I just sucked all the color out of it. There's I think the colors were stolen from a Robert McGinnis painting, if I remember correctly. But so this is an example of a limited color palette where I just consciously removed. So there's a version of it where you say, I'm only going to work with these two colors, right? But this was the reverse process. This was me removing colors from the process. So I wanted to reserve red for only blood. So anywhere in the comic where there's blood, I'm going to use a red, but nowhere else. So I took red out and I sort of did that consciously with a bunch of colors. And this is a Louisiana story, very specific to Louisiana. So I wanted everything to have an aged look to it. So all the colors was kind of based on the tones and stuff I was going for. Was there something else about the color that I forgot?
Yeah.
What?
You didn't talk about contrast. Using the colors.
Oh yeah, contrast. Yeah, there you go. The light source behind them with the New Orleans style lamp, the black figure over the white background, right? So if I show this for you, if I show this for a second and moved on, and I said, what color was the figure in the background? You'd probably say gold, right? Because everything else is kind of gold and green, but the figure's black and the background behind him is white for the sake of clarity. And then the shadow kind of fades into the darker color. So that's a good example of that with a little tiny figure. So, and I cheated so hard on the perspective by making it curve. Light doesn't curve that way. So that's one of the cool things we can do in comics. Yeah.
How do you sit together and find like say we wanted servers, focused on that, or mining.
So the- Got it. So the question's about finding like a Discord server specific to the industry or the skill you're trying to do. I can only tell you how I'm in Discord servers, and they're all by invitation. And some of them I asked for. So I have a certain Twitter following, and there are a lot of professionals. We're all connected on there in comics and film and stuff. And I put out the call one day, like, hey, any interesting Discord servers on this topic? And I got a couple of them. So I'm in 2 for writing. I'm in another one for art. I don't check the art one because it's just a bunch of nonsense. I don't know most of the people in it. Like there's, again, like the volume thing, there's so much in there, it's not useful. So I don't even use that one anymore, but the writing ones are pretty good.
This is for fine arts that is open work. And there's the base, like, so there, like, one back when you. So, looking in better fine art, and then it's the art and development. Although they have usually have this department, they need to process only those and then buy.
Facebook groups too, same with Facebook groups.
You want to start with where it is prior to the and then you go back to
Yeah, there's a thing where as you're networking with working professionals that I think you'll lock onto, no one wants to do free work because everyone's overloaded. Like I have way too much work. I'm not doing free work for anybody. However, everyone wants to feel like an expert. So anytime you're phrasing a question to someone, phrase it in a way to where you let them be the expert a little bit. And people love that, and they're more likely to give you information, right? Whether it be ego or whatever, but it tends to be more effective than asking them to do work. So that's worked for me. Yeah.
I have a different and are we going back in with this whole thing on the side and
Communication department. Yeah.
So my question is, do you have a recommendation for
Mhm. I would, so the best, in my opinion, the best place to look for color ideas is in logo design. The really good logo designer. So Von Glitchka is one. You can check out his stuff. I think my color theory is pretty good. What's his name? Alan Peters. Alan Peters is really good. A really good logo designer, they spend a lot of their time looking at color and figuring out what works color-wise, what pops, what doesn't pop, what creates a certain, like what gives a meaning of tech, what gives a meaning of conservation and green, you know what I mean? They think a lot about colors and meaning and what they do and how they work. Plus it's simple. The palettes are really simple to kind of grasp and understand. So I would stay away from books a little bit because you're going to get a lot of just typesetters who aren't designers. I would go for the really good designers. Yeah, but it's not well curated. There's a bunch of junk on it. But if you go to a bookstore, go to a bookstore and take out your phone camera and snap like the magazine stand or something like that. And automatically you better see what catches your eye and you can figure out why. Again, like the reverse engineering thing, it's like, okay, I can't read any of this text except those two from this distance. Why can I read that text and not the other ones, right? And it'll be things like the ratio of font to open space in between. So the positive and negative space inside each letter is a certain amount, little stuff like that you'll better pick up on. But I always say too, like, if you're not really sure, keep it simple. So if you think about black and white and 30% gray, you're probably fine. Black and white will both show up on 30% gray. And if you find a color that hits about 30% gray, let me see, I'll go back to this golden thing I used earlier. It's about a 35% tone on it. Let me see. And so again, like talking about how the color really doesn't matter as much as the value. That gold color I can swap out for almost any color of that same value, and it'll work. I could do it with a blue or a green or whatever. I guess it was way at the beginning. Oh, there we go. There it is. All right, this thing. So that's about a 30%, whereas everything else is black and white. So the black logo in the middle, the white logo on the right, and then 30% gold. That's also 30% gray behind the bottle. Somewhere in that range. It's within, margin of error, but you could do a blue, you can do a green, orange, doesn't matter. Any color you swap that has that kind of 35% value is going to look great against black and white. And I also cheated. The gold in the middle is darker than the gold on the right. I lightened it just a little bit to help the black show. So, but that's kind of it's always a good starting point for readability is to go 100%, 0, and then 30. It's a good kind of marker. I don't read the books, I make the books. More questions?
And when it comes to showing it to the right people, I find myself in a situation where I consider myself highly creative, very driven, and I do a lot of work. But I find myself kind of paralyzed once the work is done.
Right.
And I think you saw Field, right?
I did, yeah.
So
very good.
Me and Brooke have been considering making it a limited series because so many people in the festival that it has been shown have requested. And we don't see why not. Okay, can we do it person every?
Yeah, absolutely.
But we've met like 2 times and we're both very creative, but we kind of stop. We're like, what?
Yeah. I mean, so the film thing, I'm on a different side of the film equation than you are, right? I do different stuff than what you do. However, the networking stuff happens way before you need to find someone to show it to. Like the circle of trust, like if you start building that circle of trust right now, you expand your community, you have your reach, you have people you can get referrals from. Once all that's built, then you get the referral to someone like a Mark Duplass or something like that, right? And then that's when it kind of cracks everything open. Or you find an intro to someone like A24, right? That stuff kind of falls in that world a little bit. If you were leaning more horror, you might want to get an intro to someone at Blumhouse, or, you know what I'm saying? That sort of world. So, and it's those creators that get you access to the studios and the distribution systems and all that. So you networking to a distributor is going to be really hard. You networking to a writer that works with the distributor is going to be a lot easier, right?
Okay.
So I would do the peer group. I would really focus on the peer group and growing that out. And what that means is going to South by Southwest, going to Sundance, going to Austin Film Festival, New York, all the major festivals. Even some of the smaller festivals, you get better access because they're not as busy, Comic-Cons are the same way. Like if I go to San Diego and New York, there's 200,000 people at those shows and you can't talk to anybody. There's just too much going on. Whereas if I go to Charlotte or even here at our show, I was able to spend several hours with a creator, after hours and stuff like that, because there's not as much going on. There's way less activity. So if you can look at the guest list and the film showing, you can't always tell if the filmmakers are going to be there or not. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but I would really keep an eye on that and try to grow that circle. In particular, those who are doing something of a similar genre that you guys are trying to do, that speaks specifically to the work you're doing. Because if you're going to someone that does mostly like really heavy car action chase scenes and stuff, they're going to have a different network. They probably won't be able to open as many doors. So the peer group that are, the people that are sort of making the same journey. Like I do a lot of comics, but I'm not a superhero artist. The most of my close friends in comics are also not superhero artists. And if I were a superhero artist, that would be the opportunities I would get. I don't want those opportunities. So it doesn't open the right doors, So I would focus on that really heavy. And it could probably work for this one, but it'd work better for the next 2 or 3 down the road as you build that group out. Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, it's a Bob Ross thing, right? Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I got some. I do classes for kids and teenagers. So I do a drawing class and a comic book class. And my business card has I don't answer the phone, so don't call. But I do text and I do email and stuff, so. Thank you. Sure.